By way of introduction, my name is Mary Ambrose Jirac, as it says on the board. I've been here for over 10 years at MCC. I've been practicing law for 30 years in Illinois. I went to Notre Dame Law School, and after I went to Notre Dame Law School, I worked at a large law firm in the city for 5 years, and then I was appointed a special EEOC prosecutor. And what that means, I don't know how far you've gotten in your course, is that I was one of 19 people in the Chicago office that investigated violations of employment rights, and my special area of the law, we're not allowed to say we're specialists, but my special area, it was sexual harassment and gender issues. So when Kathy first asked me if I would talk about the business ethics class that I teach here at MCC, she was like, and will you focus on some of the women's issues? There's going to be a little bit of introduction here because many of you, although I have one of my alumni students and one of my current students here have taken 241 and know a little bit about ethics in general, but this is a very hot topic, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have when I'm finished. I am a licensed practicing attorney in Illinois, as I said. I have an office in Lake Barrington. I provide employment law services to the Motorola, Rand McNally, UOP, many of the Fortune 50 companies in the northwest suburbs, as well as SHRM, which is a Society of Human Resource Managers, if any of you want to go into human resources out here. I also work in the courthouses, 5 of them, and I rotate and hear cases. I didn't stand for election. I'm an appointed person who goes and does that. So I'm in McHenry County Courthouse on Fridays. Please, if you ever run into me, come up and say hi. I hope I don't run into you for any other reason than that. But that's what I do. I'm also married to an attorney as well, and I do have 2 college students of my own. So I kind of have a handle on what you guys are going through because my kids are going through it. So again, any questions you have afterwards, any way I can be of help to you. I work here as an adjunct in A124, and I do teach this business ethics class, which will be offered in January, and they've moved it up. They have me condense it into 8 weeks, and they have it starting in January, and they're probably going to run it again in the spring for another 8 weeks. If any of you are interested, and I'll tip off to you what is in this class when I go through the handout that I've provided to you. And I also teach Business 241, and I'm teaching Business 150, so that's where you'll find me, is right across the hall if you're looking for me. Anyway, what's fascinating to me about business ethics is we have a textbook here at MCC, and it's in its 8th edition, but I don't really know how we'd have in the United States a book before then, because while we have a lot of ethical principles, and we all have a lot of morals, and we all have a lot of ideas about what it is to be ethical, there isn't a lot of law in it. And so it's surprising we even found a book that's in its 8th edition. We have a lot of theories. And if you open the handout up, the first page is just on what are theories, and that you will see when you write your own papers. You want things to be fair. You want things to be just. You want people to get fair compensation. We want women not to only earn 80% of what men do for the same job. Those come from long-time philosophical principles. Here at MCC, we do offer basic philosophical ethics courses, but we're moving towards having this business ethics class be something that our business students and other students can take because it's very practical. The Socrates and the philosophers like Rawls I've listed here, they definitely are the bedrock of where these cases come from, because we didn't even have any cases or laws until really we had some really bad troubles in the 1980s in the United States. On the second page I mentioned Rawls, and he talks about how there's been a veil of ignorance around people, and that people didn't want to see or hear or know about the things that other people were doing. And I think you see that. I watched Megyn Kelly interview someone this morning who was an actress who was coming forward and talking about, she said, we have this casting couch problem in the movie industry with women being asked to do certain things in order to get jobs that they shouldn't be asked to do. And it happens, believe me, amongst lawyers. It happens amongst business people. And we kind of put a veil over it, and we just pretend, or we just assume you have to put up with it, or you don't say anything because if you do, you're going to get fired. And so that's what some of our philosophers talk about. That's the basic philosophical underpinnings of where the business ethic laws come from. Business ethics, by definition, is a balancing test. It's weighing a moral value against profits and losses. And even by saying that definition to you, you're going to understand that it's not a straight, okay, this is wrong, and we're not going to do it at this company anymore, or this school, or in this workplace. Oftentimes, people are just trying to, like, could we afford to lose Harvey Weinstein if he's making all these great movies? Could we afford to call somebody out who was committing some of these ethical violations? And in that case, the balance was tipped the wrong way. A business went and looked for profits, and they didn't look for what was the moral value more important. They tipped it that way. And so it's business ethics is a two-pronged definition, and that would be the definition. And those are, again, on that page, on the fourth page of my handout, those are some more of the definitions of business ethics and that weighing process. They talk about the business stakeholder. And the stakeholder oftentimes is considered, people immediately think, oh, that's the shareholder of Harvey Weinstein's company. Or that's, but stakeholder, business stakeholder is also the consumer. Or it can be a group of women that work for Uber who aren't happy about the sexual harassment antics that are going on at the company. So stakeholder gets kind of loosely defined, but who's the most powerful stakeholder is oftentimes how some of these ethical scenarios get resolved. When I said that we didn't really have business ethics laws, you can take a look yourself, as I put on page 6. There are 4 places you can look. You can look at a statute and see if you have a statute where you live or work or what county you're in. You probably hear on the radio right now that our legislature is writing more statutes and mandating sexual harassment training in workplaces. But that'll tell you what was missing. We didn't have statutes. We didn't have the right ones in place. We also look at common law or case law. What I will tell you for the 30 years that I've been doing this is they have now, the United States Supreme Court has said, anybody who's a defendant in any of these kinds of sexual harassment or gender discrimination cases who has not provided education or training for its employees it does not have a defense. And they've now spelled out, and there was a 100 and some page report from the EEOC last summer that if you do not provide interactive training, it's not good enough. And I tell all my employer clients that, but again, it's the balancing scale. So, and what do we mean? We take like a few dozen questions, and they do have scenarios in them. But if you can't ask questions or you can't interact with the questions, the Supreme Court has said that's not sufficient. So, like the common law, which I mentioned on page 6, is developing, and we're getting some guidance from the courts. We're actually making new laws and regulations. And we do have, right in Title VII, which I'm sure your teachers are talking to you about. No, not yet? Oh, okay. Title VII is the first, I'm going to back up a little bit. When I went to law school 30 years ago, we were just really coming into 2 kinds of law. My husband became an e-commerce lawyer, and we didn't have e-commerce because we didn't have computers back when I went to school 30 years ago. We used these big old law books this big, and we also didn't have employment laws. All we had was LBJ, and you can see it in the movie that just came out, the new Civil Rights Act. And that was the first time we ever said, here's a list of people we're going to protect. And you can't be fired at will if you, based on your age, your sex, your sexual orientation, your race, your religion, your ethnicity, and we defined about a handful of protected categories. So that's all we had when I came out of law school. Then in 1991, when I got appointed as a special prosecutor, we all of a sudden got a whole bunch of new laws. So that's why when I tell you there aren't even textbooks on a lot of this, and when they came about, that gives you some historical perspective. So I was born in 1962, and right after that, the Civil Rights Act came out in 64. So it's only been in my lifetime that we even have laws that will protect us from what you hear everybody complaining about in the media and in the workplace right now. So, and then the next body of laws came out in the 90s. But I think my own perspective is the economy got bad. There were several recessions after the 90s. There was a recession in 2000 after 9/11. There was another one, they call it the Great Recession in 2008. Companies, workplaces didn't have the money to educate their employees. So they knew they had to. There was a basic law, but they didn't explain to their employees. They did what I call kind of like piecemeal, like, okay, I'll put a little quiz on gender discrimination on my computer and you read it and you figure it out. That's not the same as training people or educating people about sexual discrimination or harassment. However, I'm going to give you some other sources if you're trying to write a paper in class about ethics. And what I put on page 7 is, in my business, we have a code of ethics. And we are governed by that. We pay for a license every year to the state of Illinois, and my license costs about $300 and some every year, and then I have to have malpractice. I have to take an oath that says certain things. Well, believe it or not, folks, one of the reasons I'm in this discussion group with you about business ethics is we didn't have a law, ethics rule, code, statute that regulated lawyers from not sexually harassing their own clients. So if you Google my name and you look in 1993 in the Chicago Tribune or in the lawyer publications, I actually drafted a 53-page report to the Illinois Supreme Court, and I said we lawyers need to not harass or conduct ourselves have sexual misconduct with our own clients. Well, in 2016, I got a phone call. Would you come down to Springfield and testify? And I was like, why? What about? And they're like, your report, it's been sitting here for 17 years or whatever it was, and we hadn't done anything about it. And I was like, you're kidding me. And they said, and besides that, everybody on your committee's dead but you. And I said, so now I'm old, and I get to, but I did get invited, and I'm very proud to say that I just finished speaking to the Lake County lawyers, sponsored by the Notre Dame Club, and to the DuPage County lawyers on the rule that I drafted. And we now, if you have a lawyer who's sexually harassing you, they can get in big trouble because we have a shall not rule, and we spell all that out, and it went into effect last year. It went into effect at the beginning of 17. So that's one of my reasons why I'm really interested in ethics. But I will tell you that this class that the green flyer's out there about that starts in January and it runs for 8 weeks, it is the first one in the state of Illinois. McHenry County College is the first one to have it in the state. I wrote the curriculum. And we are the first ones to offer that as a topic if it interests you. And I'm very proud of that. We've had Columbia and Loyola, I noticed, I won't say which one took my syllabus and is trying to get it started, but we've had it first. And it also includes, for those of you who are accounting majors, it includes 25% of the CPA is business ethics. And so we're the only place to have a review for that for our students built into the curriculum before you take the CPA exam if any of you are accountants. But like I said, you look for codes. That's where you go to look for information about ethics, because we don't necessarily, like I said, the laws haven't caught up with the social problems we're having. So our consciences may, our morals might, but we don't. You need stuff that you can sue people for and on. Public policy suggests it. So you might say to yourself, well, Mary, what's in that book? Was there 8 editions of that business ethics book that you're using? And if you look on page 8, all we had for things that courts could say was a business ethics violation or companies is a way of resolving ethical dilemmas, and we had a little bit of a test. We had something called the front of the newspaper test, the Wall Street Journal test. Is the story that you just told me so egregious that it would offend someone if they saw it in the Wall Street Journal? And we also had personal decisions. We had someone named Laura Nash wrote a model, and I'm not going to get too much more into that now, but that's all we had, and that's where people like me, when they were writing a curriculum or were writing a rule for lawyers, we have to go to stuff like that to get our information to make something actionable. I did introduce to you in here, and I'm so glad that I have mostly students because I was trying to decide. We do have a code of conduct here at MCC. We have a student code of conduct, and we have a faculty code of conduct, and we have a staff code of conduct. And you may have not seen it. It's available online if you want to read it. I challenge you to go look at the sections that necessarily pertain to issues that you're studying in your class for information or something that you can cite as a resource. But what I find interesting about studying an environment is any place you go take a job. If you're working at the Wendy's, if you're working at TJ Maxx, if you're, I live and work in Barrington, as I mentioned, and my husband and I were asked to be the chaperones for the ski club in Barrington. And what I first did before we started this, and I said, why did you ask us? And they said, well, we've had some problems. So we'd like you to get involved and you and your husband be like the chaperone of the chaperones. So the first thing I did was pull out the codes. And I pulled out the student code, and then I pulled out the parent code. And what I thought was really unusual, and you're welcome to look it up yourselves, is that the parent code was longer than the student code. And it spelled out a lot of things in particular. And that told me something about the culture. There must have been a lot of problem with the parent chaperones, so that they had to write out all these rules, that parents couldn't drink when they were chaperoning ski kids, and parents couldn't drive students, or parents couldn't do this or that. So I'm saying to you, whatever workplace, whatever school you go to, first thing you ought to do is pull out their code and see what sense of it. Have they addressed some of the issues that concern you? Do they respect the rights of people that are there? Have they spelled out what they consider inappropriate behavior? Do you know what that is? So I included, starting on page 9 of the handout that many of you have from Kathy, I did include, just to see what a sample is. And I put a note, you can read the full code of conduct and the hyperlink to it. But it has, the students have rights to be notified if they're being charged with anything, and present their own evidence. I did put on page 10, college students are expected to demonstrate qualities of morality, integrity, honesty, civility, honor, and respect. You guys, when you work a lot of places, they might just say, be respectful. Or they might just say, it's unusual that civility is included here, meaning being courteous to one another. It's interesting that MCC has included in its protective conduct morality, because it didn't say what kind of morality. But that is in here. It said sex discrimination, harassment, and misconduct is strictly prohibited in your code of conduct. And using the words shall or is strictly prohibited, it means it's emphatic that there's no tolerance for it. But doesn't say zero tolerance. That's even a higher standard. And if you're studying this in class, zero tolerance can mean like you're just immediately terminated or kicked out of something. So you have to learn to spot the language in a code to know how strict it is if it's in the code. And that's what we talk about a little bit more in the class. But this I thought was neat. Page 11 has the academic dishonesty, code of conduct, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. And it also, codes break down into the shall nots, the will nots, the may nots, and then they also have procedures, what happens. So if you're looking for a procedure and you've had an issue like this, that's where you would go and look in your codes of conduct for both the faculty and the staff and the other students. Other items you might note in the cheating part, and I'm only using this to demonstrate the use of language in this area, they've really spelled out what cheating means. And the reason why I thought that was interesting from A to F, they didn't really spell out what was their moral or civil code on that other page. They just put that word in there. So then what? How do you know it's right or wrong? And actually, if you go on to page 13, they've got G through J on some more things that they have found are matters of academic dishonesty. They define on page 14 plagiarism, hampering or discrediting the academic work of others. So you have just an idea of what a code is. But however, a code at MCC can implement, and they can have their own consequences. It's not necessarily the same as breaking a law, and you understand the difference, right? Breaking the law would put you down at McHenry County Courthouse, and we'd see you down there. But any questions so far before I get into some specific discussions? Anybody? Okay. I'm on to the last page of my handout, which is about current issues in the workplace. And Kathy Hayhurst sent me the NPR article. Are women held to higher ethical standards than men? And there's actually a study from the University of Pennsylvania Wharton, and it talks about women, apparently they've tracked statistically, if we're called in, we're getting harsher punishments, according to their research. They actually delved into in this article, and I don't know if Kathy was pointing this leading to me to this, but they studied the American Bar Association, and they studied lawyers, and they said when they bring lawyers in to discipline them, women 35% of the time will get disbarred as their consequence, meaning they can never practice law again, and men only 17% for the same offenses. And their studies from 2016, they looked at 500 cases, and that was their methodology. They said it was interesting to see that it didn't seem to bother people as much if there was a dirty male lawyer as there was if there was a dirty female. And then they flipped the statistics and said it was like 106% of the time women got more severe punishments. And the article that I put up, which it's fascinating, it's from 2002 research, and it shows the cover of the Time magazine article. And there's another site to it in 2014, is are women more likely than men to be whistleblowers? And those of you who've had me before, do you want to share what a whistleblower is with anybody? Anybody know what a whistleblower is?
They identify issues in a company kind of thing. Yep,
they identify corruption, sexual harassment, things that violate the codes in a company, and they tell somebody. And I guess it comes from the notion that they're like blowing the whistle. In the ethics class that I teach, we cover not only the crooks, but we also cover the whistleblowers. And I hadn't really thought about it in terms of percentages until Kathy was asking me. We cover Martha Stewart and what her sentence was for tipping off her stockbroker and doing some insider trading and selling her stock. And we also cover a woman named Rita Crundwell, who was a treasurer of one of our Illinois cities downstate, who swiped $56 million of tax revenue and had an amazing horse farm. And how she got away with it, she wasn't discovered until she went on vacation, and someone else who was taking over for her while she was on vacation looked at the books and realized that's where all the tax revenue had gone, was to her personal use for her horse farm barn community. It's considered, though Bernie Madoff is now, and then we cover him too. Does everybody know who Bernie Madoff is? Did you see the TV show recently or the movie? We cover Blagojevich, our former governor who's in jail, in this business ethics class. We cover the big cases that really started the impetus behind ethics laws. Were two companies. One was Enron and one was WorldCom. Anybody seen the Jim Carrey movie called Fun with Dick and Jane, where they kind of are vaguely referring to being in that company, where the companies basically took the money out of the employees' pensions and bankrupted the companies, and they used it for their own personal gain. In those two companies that are, WorldCom had a whistleblower. It was a woman named Cynthia Cooper. Enron, Sharon Watkins went after Ken Lay and said, these accounting records, it was an accountant, these accounting records don't add up, and you're sending money here and there and not where you're supposed to. So there were two women whistleblowers there. Briefly before you came in, we were discussing the Meryl Streep character, Karen Silkwood, who's in a movie. You've probably seen some movies with whistleblowers in them. Another woman whistleblower that we don't talk about as much in this class, but former President Bill Clinton had gone on television and said that he had not engaged in sexual relations with this young intern named Monica Lewinsky, who was in his office. And there was a woman who worked at another branch of the United States government who knew that indeed they had engaged in something, and she also knew that Monica Lewinsky had a navy blue dress, I think it was from the Gap, that had evidence on it in the back of her closet. And so that lady was a whistleblower, and then President Clinton got impeached. He got the articles of impeachment and got indicted. He didn't get thrown out of office, but he did get impeached for lying. So those are some examples of whistleblowers that are in my course particularly. And I'm going to talk a little bit further about what's in the article. There was a whistleblower who had worked at Goldman Sachs, and she had only worked for a few months and sent an email out and was a whistleblower for what was going on at Goldman Sachs. And there was another whistleblower in the article whose name was Sally Cratchit. I I think both of those women got fired as a result of their whistleblowing. Whereas in the two cases we cover in my course, Enron and WorldCom, the women somehow managed to sustain their jobs. So when we talk about whistleblowing, the big price, if you're going to come forward and talk about somebody's unethical conduct, is that there's retaliation typically, and people who bring those things forward have risk of that. And that's what I'm hearing most commonly in the news, and I'm sure you are now, that until there were large groups of women and 70 people talking about Harvey Weinstein or Kevin Spacey, people were scared to say anything because you come forward on your own and you're whistleblowing, it's hard. So when Kathy first said to me, Mary, do you think that, and her article was, are women held to a higher ethical standard than men? I think there's a common theme for that and the whistleblowing article in that. We don't have as many women in powerful positions as we do men, and we don't know necessarily where we work, where we live, where we go to school, if there's a locker room culture or a casting couch culture. So we don't know if I make a complaint or what is the ethical conduct around here, how will it be received, and we don't know if we'll be protected or not. So that's why I think that there's that kind of stigma in society, but I also think many of the discrimination, harassment things that we see are based on power. I'm not sure that they're based on sex. Women, if you've seen the Demi Moore, Michael Douglas movie, there was a woman who was sexually harassing a man in that movie, and that to me was very novel. And when I was at the EEOC, we saw cases of women harassing men. Maybe they're not as frequent, but I think it relates to power. So do I think that now that we're getting more women CEOs in America, or getting more women in powerful positions, or now that we have this movement, that it will be easier to complain? I hope so. I hope people feel protected if they can come forward and talk about what's happened to them. Typically, at the companies that I represent, there's an anonymous hotline, and there are ways to complain with some limited anonymity. It's hard to guarantee anonymity and conduct an investigation because it's hard to protect people that are complaining. So I will say that this is a hot topic. It's important before you take your first job, or you take your first, part-time, full-time job, or you go to a school, to find out what the culture's like. I was very, very shocked myself. I have a neighbor, and I have many friends that sent their kids to different colleges, and to find out what the reputations were at some of these schools amongst like the football programs, or the cases that you probably could look up and read if you're interested in writing a paper on this is UVA. There was a very bad situation in Baylor, and with their football program, there was some cases in California. There's been, Penn State had some cases, and it's not just the fraternity hazing cases. It's the treatment of women on campus cases that are making the news. What was very sad to me about the Baylor case is that the president of Baylor was the very man that was picked to investigate Bill Clinton, and he got fired. Was ultimately what's happened, because he let the whole scandal go, and that's what they decided he was a very powerful lawyer. He was from Kirkland and Ellis. He was very well regarded, and you would have thought if he had done the work in D.C. that he would have protected the female students more completely at Baylor. But I would say to you, you can read a code, and I would suggest that wherever you go, and I tell my students, whenever you take a job, go online, look at their HR policies, look at their EEO statement. Does it appear to be one-sided, two-sided? Does it have all the right vocabulary in it? And then you got to go beyond that. You got to talk to people. You got to go online, and you got to see if there's cases out there, and you got to Google things and Google people's names. There are still people in power in very important companies that, there's one of them that I'm thinking of in particular that's one of the very major telecom companies in the United States. And it's very easy to find out that one of the CEOs has paid out because it's a publicly held company, and they've paid out on sexual harassment charges. Now, I'm saying if you've paid out on more than 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, how many were not even paid out to the people that are involved? So somebody wants you to come work for their business in McHenry County, and I'll tell you this, it seems like an extra step, and it seems like, oh, you'll never find anything. I myself went to work with a lawyer, and I never checked, and I'm supposed to know how to do this. So tell your friends to check. Check when you apply to schools. Check where your environment is, because that's your protection. I mean, that you're at a good place, that the culture's good, that you have people to talk to, people that care about you. And I do know that universities have to have freedom of expression and speech, and we want that, and that's what it's all about. I thought it was kind of interesting, and you can check the veracity of my story on this. I have a story about Loyola of Chicago downtown, and I have a daughter who's attending, and she said that there's a gentleman who runs an organization, and it's called a pro-rape culture, and he wants to come march with some men on campus, and he apparently got a permit to do it at Loyola of Chicago and in Seattle. Well, and there was an announcement from the school, and don't quote me on what it said, but it basically warned the students that they were allowing him his freedom of expression, or he was marching on the edge of the campus, and letting the students know that he was there. Well, it was either the women's kickboxing or martial art team that posted that they wanted everybody to go and greet this person on the campus, and suddenly he canceled his presentation. But I mean, so I think what my suggestion is besides doing your research, checking out where you're going, checking out who's there, checking out who's running things, keeping your ear to the ground, Googling names, reading in the media. There is stuff out about, there's stuff out about a lot of people that are still in power, and I think that's what we're finding in the news. But you'll find out if you're able to step up as the women's kickboxing team did, and share your difference of opinion about what you think, and that's how I think we get this whole situation improved. But I also think that we're going to see a lot more evolve in the area of business ethics, because we now have a lot of people fighting these issues, and with technology, the information's coming out to us much faster. I'm not a sociologist or one of the teachers here that could answer the question, like, is the same amount of stuff going on? Are we just knowing about more of it? Or was this always going on and it's just technology that's telling us all that? We do have protections if you are retaliated against in any of your situations, at work or at school. That's not right to be fired because you come forth with a complaint or be kicked out. There are processes, but again, check the culture, check where you're going to school, and work. And I don't know, Kathy, do you think that that women whistleblowers are? Actually, that's funny. The study said that there are more women.
It's interesting that the new ethics officer for the state of Illinois is a woman, and that. But there's what they say, a 3 or 4 year backlog minimum.
And there was nobody in the office for several years. Yeah, she's got to get to them.
So, like, where does she begin? Is she in this alone? Does she have a group? And how are those processed? And at what rate? And by the time they're through those, are we then still compiling 3 or 4 more years in addition to that with current stuff going on? It's interesting to me that I'm just going to use this case because we vacation in New Hampshire, but like a female faculty member who might approach a young man unethically, and that the press is normally all over that, and it's front page news and national news. That's happened in several different cases, and one out in Washington, and it just seems like people expect, and in general, men to be pigs, and they're not as held to a higher standard like women are put up there. It seems there's a different expectation. If it's a woman, it's so outrageous that she's automatically condemned, and if it's
again, and that's
sort of where I'm coming from.
The media is an interesting fourth branch of government, as they say, or institution or whatever. But I think we're going to see a lot more development of law to address what's happening. I mean, and that's generally, law comes at the end. But again, we want to talk about norms, values, the way we treat each other. Those things we can all model.
I think it ties back to something we talk about in our class is an English class.
Right.
We're actually doing literary, sort of looking through literature and how the sexual inequality kind of emerges.
Sure.
But one of the things that we talk about in our class is the idea of the angel in the house, right? So it's this very Victorian ideal of the mother as the keeper of values. It is the mother's job to keep the Bible at the forefront of the family. It is the mother's job to enforce manners, morals, ethics.
Civility,
And to stand right as this model sort of citizen and creature. Of course, we problematize that in our class and talk about how difficult it is to stand on a pedestal for anybody for very long. But that the fall from the pedestal for women is much further because they're held up so much higher. So when they step off, the devastation is larger. We also talk about the fact that mothers who hurt their children are a media sensation, just like women who cross the line of sexual harassment or sexual assault. They become a sensation because they have so much further to fall. So I heard a statistic once that we said if we gathered all of the money in unpaid child support by deadbeat fathers in this country, it would be twice as much as our national debt. And we really don't talk about the amount of fathers who have no dealings at all with their children, but one mother who does a bad job mothering.
Or drives her car into a...
Yes, she will be, like we said, sort of the center of a public crucifixion because of how far she's fallen.
Well, and that I'm sure you can trace back even to art, to the woman in white, the virginity concept, the women on the pedestal in literature. And again, it's interesting with the witches concept and Salem and it wasn't just women, but that's who all of us walk away thinking was in that particular episode. What I think we need lots more respect. I think we need to raise our kids with a lot of respect. We need to talk to both sexes about how to treat each other and that kind of education and training. Look for a culture that does that has diversity training, that has implementation of interactive EEO policy discussions. Look for schools that do that, or how we value or what the models are. Are there women? There's women vice presidents here and deans, and is that respected, and how are people treated, and that that's a lesson that I didn't have, even coming out of school myself. And I was like, I will say I went to Notre Dame Law School because I was a nominee for a Rhodes Scholarship, and I was writing some comparative papers on how the American legal system traces back to the British legal system. And Notre Dame had the only campus in England, which is where the heart of all laws were. So I thought, I got to go there because I want to study there and I want to write this book with this professor. I don't think I really understood that I was, and I only really understood this now that I've been back. I went for my 30th reunion this summer, but I was in the class, they admitted women to the law school in 1981, and I started in 84. We didn't have a women's bathroom, and they converted a men's or they put a sign up and said we could go there. The way we were treated and the way the environment is different than what I see now. And so the places come a long way. There are schools now, a lot of the colleges have predominantly female. And that changes, I hope changes the culture some on campus and the education that you're receiving. But I'm just, for those of you who are students now and you're looking at your professors or your staff around here, we've come through a lot, and hopefully you don't have to go through as much, and hopefully there's just a lot more awareness, and that's what I think a little bit why Kathy stuck putting this directed specifically to women, and though I we have some wonderful men in this room as well, but we do cover these interesting case studies in this class. It's interesting to me that in many of these situations, like where Bernie Madoff steals billions of dollars, why didn't somebody come forward? Why didn't his two sons come forward? Why weren't there whistleblowers? Who knew? If this sort of study fascinates you or you think it will help you in your pursuit of what work you're doing in your workplace, it's kind of good to know where the roadblocks are before you hit them. And is the last thing I want to say as part of my discussion. I'll open this up to questions from everybody, but we do cover both male and female whistleblowers. We do cover both male and female folks that bring sexual discrimination or harassment cases in our business ethics curriculum here, and MCC's on the cutting edge of leading a discussion about business ethics forward for the state, which I'm really excited about. And if you want to talk, I think that's one of the classes you took in person. There's one of my alum here if you want to talk to him about the amount of work that you have to do in 8 weeks or what he thought. You can catch him after class. But if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I have a comment instead of a question.
Sure.
I have a son, not a daughter. And he's talked about you don't have to educate girls about stepping forward, but you have to educate boys about treating women differently as well. Because there's still a little bit of a boys will be boys thing going on. And you need to take that younger generation of boys and teach them. What is proper behavior, what is acceptable, what maybe it used to be, and maybe some older generation person telling them, yeah, it's okay if you do this, but they need to learn also that it's not okay. They need a new.
And what I am really excited about is you can find more things to talk to your boys about and how to talk to your boys about them as well as your girls now more than ever. And I even look at the difference between I have a 24-year-old and a 20-year-old. There's more out now to be able to upload and read. What should you be telling your children? You can't just tell them you have certain expectations and they can't just break the law. That's not going to do it. You got to talk about the social, emotional implications of things. In my time at the EEOC and my sexual harassment cases that we handled, people say, well, wasn't it just a lot of he said, she said? Like, she said this happened and he said that happened, and how could you ever get to the bottom of that? And I tell people, and I tell all of you if you've been in any of these situations, there's always evidence, always. And it's just getting it to the forefront or finding it. I had a sexual harassment case where a woman said that someone pushed her in the supply closet and assaulted her. And she's like, nobody saw it, nobody saw it, nobody saw it. What am I going to do? I turned out, it was in a high-rise in downtown, a big building downtown Chicago, and I went across the street to the building across the street, and someone from across the street had seen it in the closet. And so what I'm telling you is you think nobody sees. That's the other thing that I tell people now. There's all these cameras on buildings everywhere. You can see it on the news. Some woman got accosted by 4 guys on the street yesterday, and they have video of them. And the technology out there and the number of cameras, like they say that up by water towers is a dangerous area. And someone came along and tried to snatch a shopping bag of mine, just had makeup in it. And they actually did snatch it off my arm, and they threw it in an alley when they realized it was just ladies' makeup. And they had video camera of all of it. And so what I'm saying is don't think that somebody somehow, somewhere doesn't know what happened to you if something happens to you. Because to me, that's somewhat of the difference in the last 30 years is that you see more evidence. But you have another question?
I was going to say, I was trying to find it on my phone and I could not, but it was from, I believe it was the Sunday edition of the New York Times, which is what I was trying to find and I just can't find it. But there was an article, and I wanted to use it for class too, and I remembered it just as you were speaking.
Okay.
It said that the actual reason they're arguing that all of this is coming up right now, all of this having to do with sexual assault and harassment kind of coming to a head, they argue is all coming from our homes right now. And they're saying that in our families, what is happening is we say that we have families like yours, for example, or like mine, like so many of ours are 2 working parents, a mother and a father in the traditional heterosexual household, and that we think that that's setting up a model for our children to see equality, but that in real life, this study, and I want to say that it was University of South Carolina, has done this exhaustive study that still, even with partners in the household, when you look at the work and how it's divided between the husband and the wife, that the meaningful work is still always given to fathers. The work you can see and measure and appreciate, and that the menial work, right, the work that is undervalued, underappreciated, that nobody wants to do is still assigned most often to the mother, the invisible work, and that children are super aware of that, and that they also see the amount of time that dad is rewarded by having downtime, right, football watching time, or sitting and just relaxing, playing on his tablet time, and that sort of clear hierarchy is the most impressive upon their sort of psyche, right, their self, and that they take that into their lives and see men and women then as worth different, right, they have different value. No matter what we say, right, or what lip service, or what jobs we hold, or how many, are amazingly accomplished, right, and have these great tasks and things that they do, that in their homes, children watch the way that their parents live together and see that that doesn't really matter, that still there is a clear hierarchy of value, and that involves not feeling a certain sense of obligation to honoring men and dishonoring women. And their work.
That's a really great takeaway point, and I can attribute even education to sort of in my own personal life. Some of the local hospitals will offer parenting classes, and my husband and I went to attend one. And I was really shocked when the teacher said, "How many of you have never changed a diaper before?" And someone who was married to me raised their hand who had never changed a diaper before. I was like, I thought you said you babysat. And I was really surprised. He goes, "Well, I never babysat newborns." I was very shocked. But I will say that Pete, maybe you should shut the video off now. Keep my marriage going. But anyway, but I will say they give out checklists, and they gave us enormous checklists, and they did it sort of as a psychological experiment. And they said, write down what you are doing and what you think your spouse is doing from all these tasks. And what blew both of us away is there was incredible detail on these lists, like who changes the light bulbs, who buys stamps, who writes a thank you notes, all these things that you don't necessarily see, the invisible jobs. And then they said, let's compare, the person in the front of the room said, let's your spouses, we're going to come by and we're going to resort this so that it is more well balanced for you, which I thought was really interesting. And more credit being given to the invisible tasks. So there are tools out there, and there is education, and if there's respect for each other, and if there's a good balance. Again, I mentioned to you that we're balancing morality and with profit. That's not necessarily the family's ethical model, but I would say, if you keep that ethics and that morals and that respect arm as high as you can, and have a lot of good communication. That I think is important for a family, and good tools out there. So if any of you need that checklist as you're going forward and you're meeting your mates, it does exist, and you can. And I think what's really bad in America is we've had some hard economic swings, and women were making huge advances into the workplace. And I also think we've had restructuring. We've had a lot of women, some women making it forward, and their husbands couldn't, and with whatever their skill base was. So I hope that with a strong economy for a few years, we get through some of these tough ethical issues, some of these tough business ethics, moral ethics issues. We get a lot of education and training out there, and I thank your teachers for bringing you to hear me today, sort of encourage you, and I hope some of you will consider taking Business Ethics 235. And we'll get our, and you can talk to these gentlemen out in the hall and see what their thoughts are about business and school ethics. And again, thank you very much for coming. And I'm available by email through the MCC Canvas. It was really lovely to meet all of you. Good luck. Thank you to Pete and Kathy for setting this up.